with your real estate, mortgage, learning skills, and all the things that we can do to help you build wealth, become a real estate agent or a broker, or maybe just buy your first home. We answer all the questions that you possibly can have when it comes to real estate and loans in California. So we are on the chapter on escrow and title. And if you're working in California, we use escrow and title. And how escrow works is escrow does amendments and well, it starts out here. It says, how does escrow work? And it says, escrow amendments must be signed by both parties to change the escrow. So in the very beginning thank you for the thumbs up. That was quick. So in the very beginning, when you first do a transaction, you open escrow because escrow is going to make sure that the terms of the contract are met. So what they mean by that is in the beginning, like I said yesterday, the buyers, I'm sorry, it's late tonight and I got on late and I'm sorry, but I teach the class this week. So on the weeks I teach the class, I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. So when you do a deal, you always use escrow in California to make sure the terms of the contract are met. So what's going to happen is the seller's agent is going to take the purchase contract and any counter offers, and they're going to go ahead and send that over to the escrow company that everybody agreed on. So escrow was chosen when you were putting in your offer. Most of the time, the seller will say that the seller side will say seller reserve services. Well, legally and technically, seller can't reserve services. And I don't know why a lot of people say that, but usually the seller will want to pick escrow and they'll also want to pick title. Legally and technically, per RESPA section 9, the buyer has the opportunity to pick title. So the seller can pick escrow and the buyer can pick title. If the buyer feels that they were forced to use the title company of the seller's choice, the seller can be sued by the buyer for up to 3 times the amount of the title fee. Now, if the title fee is $3,000, 3 times the amount is $9,000. And if you're the listing agent and your seller was sued because you told them they had to use your title company, guess who they're going to sue? And that's going to be most of your commission. So you don't want that to happen. So make sure that you know who's supposed to pick what. How you doing? Thank you for joining us. So escrow rules. So when you open escrow, once escrow instructions have been drawn up from the original contract, which is the purchase agreement, and signed by each party, I highlighted in the book. I'm on the Walt Huber book, Huber. I'm in this book of principles, and I'm on page 193. So when I say highlight, you can see that my book is highlighted. I highlight it before I come on. So anyway, once the escrow has been opened, neither party can change the escrow instructions without a written agreement from the other side. So once escrow is open, both sides have to agree on any changes. And sometimes a change could be just the closing date. Maybe you have a 35-day escrow and something hiccuped, like a hiccup, and you didn't get everything done on time, so you need to extend the escrow. Well, you can't just expect the seller to extend without you asking. So the buyer's agent has to go to the seller's agent and say, hey, we're supposed to close on Wednesday, but we're not going to be able to close until the following Thursday. Will your seller sign an escrow amendment to go ahead and extend the contract? So you can't just do whatever you want, okay? So I highlighted some other things that were perfect to say, and it says, it ends right there, the escrow is complete when all conditions of the escrow have been met. All conditions of the parties have been met, and the parties have received an accounting of the procedure. If both parties mutually agree to change the instructions, the change can be put into effect at any time. However, if there's a dispute that arises, which sometimes that happens, the escrow company will not proceed until both parties come to terms. If the parties cannot agree, escrow company will bring in what's called an interpleader. Now, I have not seen interpleader on the exam, but you might want to learn that word. Interpleader is what escrow does when we're having a problem and they have to try to figure out how they're going to complete the escrow. So 3 ways to terminate an escrow. First is, I got a cough going on. Completing the escrow. The second one is mutual agreement. You agree to both cancel. And then the last one's worst one, it's court action, which is an interpleader. So now it's going to say who selects the escrow. And like I said, it's something that's negotiated in your contract. So who selects the escrow company? Selection of the escrow company can be an escrow officer and the escrow officer. So sometimes, if you have a listing agent that really likes an escrow company and they work with the same particular escrow officer all the time and they have a good relationship with them, sometimes things happen smoother when you have a good working relationship. So the listing agent's going to try to get the escrow officer that they want to work with to make it easy. So an escrow officer and parts of the negotiations between the buyer and seller. So you're going to go back and forth. But usually, I would say 9 times out of 10, the seller side picks escrow. They like to also pick title, but legally the buyer should pick title. So like any other item in real estate transaction, it's part of the negotiated agreement. So that's what you're going to do with escrow. Either one of the parties may suggest the escrow company, which should be explained when completing the purchase agreement. The salesperson can certainly, now it's not going to let me change the page, I'm going to highlight it. I don't usually change pages when I'm doing this. I stay on one page, but it was a short page. Can make suggestions as the preferred escrow company for both the buyer and the seller. When the escrow company is named in the purchase agreement, the real estate listing agent cannot change the escrow company without mutual consent of the buyer and the seller. If the buyer and the seller each desire a different escrow company, which I've never seen done, then the salesperson must work for a mutual agreement before there can be an offer and acceptance. It is imperative that you, as a salesperson, disclose in writing any shared interests that you or your broker may have in a selected escrow company. So if the escrow company is owned by your real estate company, so let's say you work at ABC Real Estate and they have ABC Escrow, you have to disclose to the parties in the contract that there's an affiliate relationship, and it has to be signed in writing by both the buyer and the seller. So in italicized writing, it says, a real estate licensee is prohibited by law from receiving any kickback for solicitation of escrow business. This also applies to claiming a fee or compensation for referrals to title companies, home and protection companies, pest control companies, and what they don't have in the book, mortgage companies. You cannot, as a realtor, refer a deal to a mortgage person and say, oh, by the way, I want a referral fee. That's illegal, okay? It's against RESPA, and if it's against RESPA and the referral fee, it's a $10,000 fine and up to 1 year in prison. You don't want that. Escrow instructions. So escrow instructions are usually computer-generated forms that permit the listing of all funds and documents that will move through escrow and specify the conditions under which they will be transmitted. They then set forth the proper recipients of the funds and documents. The escrow instructions generally also include the estimated statements and general provisions. So financing is an important part of escrow. And at the very beginning, and we'll go into the financing part tomorrow, but at the very beginning, when you're working on your transaction, the buyer should have already been pre-approved on their loan before they started looking for a home. So once they're pre-approved and they know what they qualify for and they look for the home, they find the home, they write the offer, and escrow is opening up. At the same time escrow is opening up, escrow is going to ask the buyer for who are they using for the loan. And they're going to get the information, and the loan officer is going to work together with escrow. At the same time, the escrow officer is going to ask the seller, is there a mortgage on your house? And if so, who do you owe money to? Because we have to order the demand. So there's so many moving parts of escrow, and escrow is the one that has to divvy out all the numbers and the prorations. So financing being really important. Most escrows for the sale of a home include obtaining a new loan and the payoff. So like I said, and the payoff or assumption of an old loan. Most loans are not assumable, so I wouldn't say that they're going to figure out who's going to assume a loan. Sometimes you can have a seller carryback. So a seller carryback, let's say your client has 10% down, and maybe the seller, I know a guy who flips houses, and he always carries back a 10% second. So if the buyer has 10%, the seller carries back 10%, the loan on the house will only be 80% loan to value. And guess what happens at 80% loan to value? It's up to you if you want to have impounds or not. So impounds are where you pay your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance on your house payment. And your lender is going to collect your taxes and insurance and put them in what we call either an escrow account or an impound account. And that gets confusing because it has nothing to do with the escrow company you're using for closing. So there's so much information I can share with you guys, but I only want to give you a little bit at a time. So if you have any questions, you can put it in the comments and I can answer you. And we'll get through this chapter pretty quick and go on to the next and get you through the California Real Estate Principles course. Remember, let me know if you have any questions. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.